one of the things you've managed to do, you call it your retirement project, but it's as a 24-year-old now, it's kind of a dream down the line to have something similar. But the concern is always the future of publishing. Is it profitable? And it seems from the outside looking in that it's less and less profitable, because it seems like fewer and fewer people are buying books, even though there are more and more books available and they're cheaper than ever and more accessible than ever. You can get anything in in 24 hours. So what made you want to start a publishing company?
Well, before I get to that, I want to deal with the fact that you're 24 years old, because I was not much older than you, maybe a few years older when I came up with the idea of doing this. Because I met a guy when I was in my late 20s named Ed McNally, who just retired from being an oil man in Alberta, which is the part of Canada that I'm from. And he was hanging around at a lot of political conventions because he had political interests and he donated money to parties and so on. But I asked him, what he was spending his time on. And he said to me, well, I have to work, otherwise I'll drive my wife crazy. And like, he didn't golf either. So he said, he needed something to do. So he thought, what is there in, life that I now that I can spend my time doing whatever I want, what would I spend that time on? And he said, well, what am I passionate about? I guess I'm passionate about beer. So I guess I'll start a brewery. And back then, this was in, late 80s, early 90s. Now everybody does craft breweries. Nobody was doing craft breweries. And there was like 2 big brewers in the US and 2 big brewers in Canada, and that was it. But Ed went out and hired a brewmaster from Germany and started a craft brewery, which is now about the biggest in Canada. And that's how he spent his retirement. I thought that was such a cool thing to do that I always tucked it away in the back of my mind and knew that when I got to that age, I was going to do something like that. Because what else are you going to do, when you're finished with whatever was your first career in life? So keep that in mind, Stanley. It might come in handy someday, way down the road for you. As far as book publishing goes, look, I came out of magazines and newspapers, both of which were devastated by the rise of the internet and it's sucking away all of the advertising that had sustained newspapers and magazines for generations. My last years in the magazine business, we were looking at a 10% decline in revenue every year. So it just meant cutting and more cutting and downsizing and rethinking year after year after year. That gets kind of depressing after a while. People say that there's not a lot of growth in the book business, and it's true, there's not. If you look over the last decade, total revenues go up maybe 2-3% a year on average, although it's been better in the pandemic. But it's a low growth business. The fact that it has any growth seems just like nirvana to me, coming out of newspapers and magazines. Christ, that's a challenged market. This, slow growth environment is something I can live with. You're absolutely right about all of the books that are produced every year, and that's a huge challenge. Pretty much anyone can publish a book now, and I can't remember what the number is, something like 700,000 books a year in the US published every year. So it's getting really crowded out there, really crowded on Amazon. And it's a challenge to get your books noticed. That's the biggest challenge in publishing right now, is how do you get a book discovered when each book has 700,000 competitors on release? So it's got challenges, the book industry, but if you've got a good property, if you got a good book, and you got an author who's willing to work to get it out there, and a publisher who's committed to promoting it, it's possible.
Okay. Well, I'll keep that in mind. So maybe I'll start a publishing company one day.
I'll be watching.